Welcome to the Fear of Change podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Froemel, and I'm here today to talk about how we become invisible as leaders. And especially us women, how does this happen with us? How do we, go from, being the top performer to then being selected to be the leader? And then from the leader, we become invisible. How does this happen? We don't become invisible overnight, guys. We become invisible through thousands of small moments where belonging becomes way more important than authenticity. And let's look at the very beginning, right? Girls learn to be nice, right? You're told to be nice. You're also told to be agreeable. You're told not to be bossy. You're told not to be dramatic and not to hurt people's feelings. And you're always told to be helpful. I think it's that in being helpful that we just keep pushing ahead. We just keep going forward, right? Boys are often praised for leadership and risk-taking, independence. God, I just was watching the original Top Gun, and they're getting the reprimand in the admiral's office for the flyby and for dropping below deck. There was Maverick and Goose getting scolded, and at the end, he gets the girl, right? He gets the girl because he was taking the risks and he was being independent. And he promoted the hell out of himself in that movie. If we look at it, like he really was the lead and always telling people exactly, how he was the best. He was the best. He was the best. And girls are not taught to do that. They aren't taught to self-promote, right? Because then you'll be seen, But women are praised for sacrificing. We're praised for accommodating others. We're praised for being, selflessness, right? Always being available. And, before I talked about the yin and the yang discussion, a healthy yin is receptive, intuitive, compassionate, where that shadow yin is passive, self-abandoning, and powerless. So what we're seeing here is in how we teach girls, we teach them to do the yin stuff, right? That passive, self-abandoning powerlessness. In our boys, we teach them yin. We teach them all about the fact that they have this, capacity to be receptive and intuitive and compassionate. What we realize is that women are living in the shadow yin, and the body begins storing stress because authentic impulses are repeatedly suppressed. Women learn, I feel angry, but I shouldn't talk about it. If I talk about it, I'll be perceived as, aggressive or frustrated, and no one's going to like me. No one's going to come and talk to me. But that energy has to go somewhere, guys. And that's really, I think, the biggest piece here is a lot of times in women, they'll find that they'll get headaches or migraines. They'll start to have digestive issues. Maybe they'll start to have what becomes diagnosed as, colitis or, I'm trying to think of the other ones that are out there. But you start finding it in the gut, and there's a lot of neck tension too that we end up having, and sleep disruption. And I think the biggest thing here that we need to talk about is that this invisibility was learned. This invisibility can be and should be unlearned, right? I think about so many of the women that I have worked with over the years. And one of the biggest pieces that I find in working with them is helping them to find who they really are, helping them identify that they weren't always this person who just kowtows to everybody and doesn't get to speak their own piece, doesn't get to have their own life. They don't have to be caught up in codependent cycles because that's what they've been taught, to be the good girl, to listen, and to behave. And the reality is that isn't real. It's what we've told ourselves. It's the story. And, when we look at narrative therapy, a lot of times we want to find out, kind of blending that with internal family systems work, we want to find out, why is it that this person has taken on this role? Why is it this person is so easily able to lose themselves basically, and then find some version of themselves that they live with for the next God knows how many, years of life that they've got in existence. And in midlife, I think that some women are really wait a second, hold on, I can do things differently. I had no idea that I could do things differently. And I honor that so much, because the reality is life isn't over. I was reading an article yesterday that said that your midlife is actually at age 35, when the reality is, women are living far beyond 70 years old. And women who are intelligent and women who have capacity to teach others and help others to also be themselves, they have far more available than, just who they were when they were 35. And gosh, I think back to my 30s, and, I was a new mom, so I was just discovering this new sense of self, this new available, yin energy of being there and attending to new creatures and, developing their lives. And I think that that's something that is so important, to think about. No, at 35, you may have just been, kind of starting to come out into motherhood. And then as you age and you go through, which is where I'm at right now, my kids are turning 18 and 21. They're becoming young, blossoming adults. And it's not to say that they still don't need me, right? But they need me in a different way. And I have to show up in a different way in order for them to receive me and to understand where I'm coming from. And, I think all of us need to recognize, where are we and what are we doing? Do we want to just be passive and self-abandoning and powerless? And again, in these days, I feel like we can be nice and kind, but we can be authentic. We don't have to fake it till we make it. And so many of us women have done that for years. We've faked it till we've made it. And it's just not helpful to our body's energy. It's not helpful to our whole community that we're surrounded by, because the community we're surrounded by is always needing us to show up so we can help each other, support each other, and be there together. So I welcome all of you to look at, when is it that you became invisible? And I can tell you that for me, I would probably say that my invisibility really started early in life. I would say my invisibility probably started when I was about 12, and I just kind of did what I was told. I listened, I obeyed, I didn't break the rules. If I did break the rules, it was quietly, and nobody was finding out. But in being invisible at that age, I felt alone as well. I didn't understand what I was giving up at that time. And I think that when I started aging, I started realizing, as I started listening to the elders around me, wait a second, there's this whole life out there. And if I don't go grab it, how am I going to ever find, who it is that I'm supposed to be? And I think that's why I decided to go to college. And again, in college, I found myself tied to this wonderful group of women. And that group of women were also into self-discovery mode, as most people are when they're in college. And I, really found myself tied to them and learning from them and connecting to them. And then also realizing ways in which I was being rejected, and ways in which I was learning to accept people in a different way and show up in a different way. I didn't have to be responsible and accountable for everybody. And that was so weird, and I didn't know what to do with that. But that's where I started really opening myself up to opportunity and possibility. I then thought about, the possibility of living in another place, and decided to study abroad. And in my studying abroad, what I learned was like, I can go anywhere. I can be anything. And I just needed to explore and show up. And in doing so, I became more myself. But then I got back to America. I got back involved in the same family system. While I was getting my master's degree, I was working full time. I was in my program full time for school. And during that time, I just, again, continued. I fell right back into my old behavior of just listening and following the rules, and trying to be who I thought I was supposed to be, trying to be who people told me I should be. And it didn't feel good. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I like being in this skin. It was like, I guess every so often I would get like the head pat and the guidance that I was doing well or that I was good enough. But when I really look back, I really wasn't trialing out any new parts of myself. I just went back to the old 12-year-old self, where I just was happy to, be nice and agreeable and do the things that everybody wanted me to do, rather than allow myself to feel the feelings. And in that way, I really think that I started to find who I really was when I started to separate myself from all those people who told me who they thought that I was. And I think when we're in midlife, especially in our careers, we work so hard to, be the best earner and be the top person, and, in the firm or whatever it is that you're in. And you're just like, I'm just trying to, get the positive regard. I'm just trying to, just do what I'm supposed to do. I'm sacrificing, I'm accommodating, I'm listening to everybody and what they want and what they need. But the reality is like, that's not enough. And ultimately, it's not enough for you and who you're becoming. And the most important thing is that you are truly being authentic to yourself. And how do we become authentic to ourselves is by not listening to that like negative, like judgy self. It's truly by listening to that little voice inside of you. That little voice inside of you is filled with so much knowledge, but it's oftentimes the outside of us is so loud that it's hard for us to hear that little voice. And I think that's the sad part, is many of us don't get a chance to listen to that inner voice that's so quiet, that's saying like, hey, tell them what you really found in your data. Tell them what it's really feeling like. Share what you really want to be doing here. Offer up like the thing that makes you feel like the best. Those little voices are so profound and so understanding, but we don't usually hear them because of all of the things going on around us. And all we hear is that criticism and that, kind of contempt for self of like, you're not doing a good enough job, and who do you really think you are anyway, right? That voice, that critic becomes so loud that we can shrink and shrink and shrink and go right back into that invisible earlier version of yourself. And I have to say that, where I think this really helps us is when we pay attention in our body and we recognize that impulse, that sensation, that if we are feeling something, we should express it. So I can be angry. It doesn't mean that I don't love you. It doesn't mean that I'm going to give up on you. But in my version of my story, one of the things that I really suppressed a lot was my anger and my frustration and my resentment. at the fact that the people that I felt should be showing up for me weren't showing up in the way that I needed them. And even when I would tell those people what I needed, I struggled to actually have them hear me fully. Because the minute that I would see any sign on their faces of rejection, anything in the behavior that they were showing me that like I was still going to be loved and still going to be cared for, if I saw any version of that, I'd immediately start repressing it and suppressing it, right? And holding it in, holding it in. And I didn't really start to have any physical problems per se back then. And I feel like it was when I was in my late 20s that I really started to like show up a little bit more in the workplace and start to ask some questions. I thought they were smart questions. And of course, as life happens, I had a weird experience where my boss was giving me back rubs and wanting to talk to me with my door closed. And I thought, what's happening right now? And I recognized at that time, like I needed to get big because I didn't know where this was going. I knew where it could go and I didn't want to go there. And then there was something that told me I need to stand up and I need to let somebody know that these back rubs are happening, even though I've been like, no, you can stop doing that, I immediately went to the HR department and let them know what was happening. And they actually stopped allowing him to be a supervisor, which I was glad about because I didn't think he was really all that appropriate as a supervisor. As a supervisor, I thought he should be doing things like asking me what was helpful in terms of our software, what was helpful in terms of our data. And instead, what I was getting was this like very machismo, like, I know best, let me give you a back rub, that's going to make you happy. And as soon as I let HR know by standing up and saying, this is happening and I don't really know what to do about it, can you give me guidance and support? I think once I did that and realized, like, wait a second, the profundity of my ability to say what was happening, be heard, and then it stopped was like, oh my gosh, did I just get like the key to the city? And not like the key to the city, like I'm going to ride this to the bank people, like I'm going to take him for all it's worth. I'm going to report, and I didn't. It stopped. That was enough. They stopped him being a supervisor. That too was enough. But I realized that I had value and I was going to add more to that organization as long as somebody was actually going to hear me and see my capacity to do the work and what I was able to shape in terms of that department and all the things that we were doing as an organization. It was so great to see that. So I started to really realize when I was about 25, I think it was, that like I didn't have to be invisible anymore. I can still say yes. I could still say what's going on and share my voice without losing myself. But guys, again, as always, we try to unlearn things and we try on new, ways of being. And then all of a sudden, like our old sense of self shows up again when we last expect it. And that happened again. My next job, I found myself like completely going like, yes, 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 I'll do that. I'll take that on. I'll do that, to a point where I was just losing myself left, right, and center. I didn't know what was happening and I never felt supported. And so then I was like, guys, I got to get out of here, And some of the women that were there that I had shared some of these things with, they were totally aware of what was happening. And they too were like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how to change this. And so I just wrote it out until I found the next job. And ironically, the next job, I did a great job. I got our accreditation done in record time. We had really great scores in our accreditation. And my boss still was like, but that's not good enough. I need you to do this now. You have to do this now. And I thought, wow, what's happening? Like, this is happening everywhere. But I realized again that the more that I was able to utilize my voice, the more that I was able to say what was going on. Like, I found myself in this place going, what is happening? Why am I being told it's not good enough? What I was doing, what I was contributing was not good enough. Why? And what I ended up discovering was that it was allowable for leadership, other leadership above me, to just do status quo and to kind of blame on other people and help in that whole process of invisibility. Was like she would ride on the coattails of those that were doing the grunt work, basically. And I then decided, you know what? I did this before. I went to HR, I talked to HR, I told them what happened, and they changed. So I went to HR and I told HR, I'm like, listen, I love this job. I love everything about this, except I'm being told often that I'm not good enough. I'm being told often that, like, I need to do more, that I need to change who I am, and she was like, oh, it's another woman leader. And she said, oh, but that's not accurate, Jennifer. And I said, yes, but that's who is leading. And that's what she's, being allowed to lead like. And she immediately said, she's been here for a really long time and is committed. And I just don't know if I can, like, force her to be different. And I lost it. I couldn't even believe that that's what I heard. Was like, we're just not going to make that woman who's been here for a long, long time change anything about her approach. And I thought, oh man, what do I do now? And what happened next was exactly, I think, what should have happened. The person that I had interviewed at another organization reached out to me and said, hey, we have a perfect job for you, and we want you to interview for it. And I interviewed for it. I rose in the ranks of the role into this position of leadership and authority. And I found out again that here it was, once again, another upper leader that was responsible for, giving me advances and helping to, like, promote me, again, was falling down on the job. I gave her information about what was happening. I told her, like, this is something that's happening. And again, like, so I was listening. I wasn't just self-sacrificing. I wasn't just accommodating. I really was leading, and I was taking risks. And in that way, I did rise in the ranks, but what ended up happening was I ended up having to go back to HR and talk to HR and tell HR about the things that were happening. So I kept using my voice. I wasn't expressing myself in a fact of anger. I was expressing myself in a way of frustration related to what was happening. So I was utilizing the data that I had around me and proof, right? The data didn't lie, and they would make the change then. So they made some changes, but again, those changes were not the ultimate changes that needed to happen. So I think it's so important here that, all of you are able to hear that your invisibility was learned and it can be unlearned. And I went through that myself, and I've helped so many other women through that, in helping them to realize that they don't need to just show up as the good girl. They need to show up as who they genuinely are. And again, they're going to probably run into some snags and some red tape. But at the end, as long as you know that you're being authentic and you're being true to yourself, it will pay off in the long run. And I really welcome you to do some of the things that are necessary, such as listening to the self and feeling in the body and allowing that feeling to show up and attend to it and nurture it. Because aren't you worth it? I think we all are. Join me on my next episode when I talk about the good girl trap. Thanks for joining.